Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/malicious compliance, where people follow orders to spite somebody. And in today's episode, employees are getting back at their bosses again. And OP tells a story about the time a Karen buys his company and tries to make him work for minimum wage, guys, and he absolutely destroys her. I hope you enjoy the super satisfying stories today. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so buckle up because this is a long one, but I promise it's worth it. This story is from June 2012, and it takes place in Australia, where we have very stringent laws around employment, firing, hiring, redundancies, maternity, etc. Here's a little bit of background. I had started working for this particular company in March of 2011. I was hired basically on the spot once I demonstrated my knowledge of the product I'd be working on, and I started 2 days later because of a deadline that had to be met. I also had a very specific contract for what I did. I was thrown in the deep end, but by the end, I managed to do a decent job on the first of many products. 2 months after I started, my direct boss was let go, and not really replaced properly, but a consultant took over the responsibilities. I should also add that a majority of operations were in Australia, while a smaller team operates in the UK, which is also where the CEO is based, despite 80 to 90% of products coming out of our office. Towards the third quarter of 2011, the CEO's contract ended and not renewed, so the hunt began for a new one who was eventually found and began also working at the UK location. After a very busy 2011, hiring almost 30 new employees and launching a bunch of new products, business was booming, until the second week of January 2012. By this point, upper management couldn't stay on top of everything, and they brought in the COO of the parent company to oversee operations in Australia. At this point, we had a group meeting where we learned the future of the company. They told us that operations in Australia would cease on June 30th, 2012. This was followed by management explaining that everyone except a handful of people would be made redundant, with payouts. The handful who would remain will instead be made redundant after finishing their projects at the end of 2012. So over the next 5 months, as operations were slowly winding up and people started to exit the company, I had lined up a few job interviews. One of these was my dream job, based in Europe, working in the exact field I wanted to be in. I kept this quiet, telling only a handful of my closest friends at my still current job. The recruitment process took quite a few weeks. Many late-night Skype interviews, as it was a big job and a massive interview process. And towards the end of May, I'm still in the running for this dream job. And by this point, pretty much everyone knows, wishing me luck. Around comes the start of June, and everyone starts to get their redundancy letters, giving them 28 days of official notice, outlining their pay schedules and all legal entitlements. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, except me. Now, I find this very strange, but I quickly realize it's because if I hand in my notice, I won't be entitled to a payout, and the company gets to save a few $1,000s. And this is where my malicious compliance kicks in. I keep quiet and I don't say a single thing. By about the second week of June, I find out I didn't get my dream job. And I tell one other person, but make sure they don't tell anyone else. Fast forward to the last week of June, and now there's just 7 employees, including me, left in the office, alongside the GM, the COO, and the CFO. Everyone except for me has packed up their desks, and at this point, I'm just showing up to basically be social and reminisce. On the second last day, I run into the COO, the guy from the parent company brought in to see the winding up of operations. The guy comes up to my desk and he goes, "You must be saddened that tomorrow's the last day." Casually, I respond with, "Oh, is it? I know it'll be quiet, but I didn't realize it's my last day." The guy then takes a closer look at my desk, still not packed up. He then gets the most confused look on his face and he responds with, "Yeah, it's everyone's last day. Why would it not be your last?" I just say, "Oh, I never got a redundancy letter." At this point, I can see the expression on his face going from, "Huh?" to "Oh crap." They were hoping that I would get a different job and resign, so I don't get the redundancy entitlements. And among everything else going on, between the GM, the COO, and the CFO, they had forgotten to issue me an official redundancy notice. At this point, he realizes all of this, and he goes, "Oh, come and see me in my office in 30 minutes. So half an hour later, I go to his office, and he's sitting there with the CFO by his side, but also kind of behind him. There's a few papers on the desk. So I sit down, and he starts by saying, "I'm so sorry we didn't do this properly at an earlier point, but here's all your redundancy paperwork." The first piece of paper is the official letter. I pick it up, start reading, and the first thing that catches my eye is the date. It had been backdated to 27 days previously. Now, this is a 2-copy letter that needs to be signed by both employer and employee. So I put it down and I go, that's not today's date." Hearing me say that, he gets flustered, and he responds with, "Oh, so sorry we forgot to get to you, but the notice was issued on that day." I respond, "It might have been issued then, but this is the first I'm seeing of it, and you'll notice it hasn't been signed by me." He then says, "Yes, but you knew this was coming." I then say, "I did, but I assumed I'd be retained for longer because I wasn't given official notice." He then says, "Well, what do you want us to do now?" I tell him, "Put today's date on it and I'll sign it." He then says, "But legally, we need to wrap up operations before the end of the month. We can't do that." I then say to him, "Well, you could try to fire me instead, but I don't think Fair Work Commission would be satisfied with your reason of me not wanting to sign a falsified redundancy letter." By this point, he's very flustered. Meanwhile, I'm just laughing my ass off in my head. He then says, "Okay, let me change this for you." He then disappears and comes back with another copy with the correct date. And he says, "Okay, here you go." I say, "I'm not signing this yet." He says, "Why not?" I tell him, "Well, I've got 28 more days of legal employment now, which means I'm owed an extra day and a bit in annual leave in my final pay schedule." He then looks at the CFO, and the CFO looks at him and nods in agreement. He then changes my payout schedule, adding another day of annual leave to it. He then prints it out and hands it to me. I carefully look over everything, and it's all in order now. I sign the paperwork, and we both get copies. He then asked me, "So what are you going to be doing here for the next 28 days? I tell him, "Nothing, I'm not coming back after today." He then says, "But you're legally employed for another 4 weeks. We can't be paying you for nothing. You should go help out the IT guy and pack up some boxes because..." I then stop him right there and I tell him, "Well, there's nothing in my contract about packing up boxes, so I'm not going to be doing that. Also, if you read my contract, it says I'm employed to work on this one specific project only, and any other work outside of this needs to be agreed on separately. And since you sold my project to the competition yesterday and is no longer at this company, I have no further contractual obligations to fulfill." By this point, the CFO is barely holding in his laughter. The COO goes on and says, "Well, that's not fair. We have to pay you an extra month for nothing. You understand that, right?" I tell him, "Well, that's not my problem. My contractual obligations have been fulfilled, so I'm gonna pack up and go home at 5 p.m. He then says, "Okay, please make sure it's not before 5 p.m. I then get back to my desk and I pack it up in less than 5 minutes. I put all my personal belongings in a box and I sit around doing absolutely nothing. One of my colleagues, who is remaining for a few more months, comes over and he said, "What was all that about?" I explained everything in detail and he lets out the biggest booming laugh. He then goes back to his office, closes the door, and continues laughing. 15 minutes later, the CFO comes over and he says to me, "You know what? You don't have to stay until the end of the day. You can take off whenever you want." And this is the story of how I got an extra month's pay due to management's incompetence. Guys, I freaking love this so much. Like, just a mix of greed and incompetence that came back to bite them in the end. And I'm so glad that OP knew employment laws and he didn't give in when his bosses tried to make him sign those papers. Like, how sleazy was that? And this person shares their similar experience, and they say German laws are even more stringent. I know of one case where this US manager came over to hold an all-hands-on-deck meeting. No reason given. He then told everyone that they're terminated effective end of the month, including German HR staff, with 1 month's severance pay. As all the managers were dismissed too, he would handle the shutdown. So in any German law, any termination must be in writing to be valid. As the HR staff was affected as well, they didn't feel any obligation to educate the top boss. The managers, who were also affected, also shrugged, and maybe smirked a bit when he wasn't watching. so everyone was still legally employed and continued to appear at work. The end of the month approaches, and people keep requesting vacation days and so on, asking where they should appear next week when the offices are closed. When the CEO wonders about this, they tell him that they're still legally employed, so he wants to fire everyone in writing. HR staff saw this coming, and all of them called in sick, so he tries to write the termination letters himself, and in a hurry. Not knowing German law, he completely messes it up. The next week, he had lawsuits from every employee, including HR, all with the same lawyer. Also, as his own German legal staff was also suing, they cited conflict of interest rules and refused to help him. The CEO then calls up an external lawyer. Only then, somebody told him how he completely effed it up. So, by making an illegal termination, he made sure that every judge would check for every T crossed and I dotted on any follow-up termination. Since he made more mistakes, his chances for any termination to stand was practically zero. In the end, the termination was delayed by 6 months, and everyone received 2 monthly salaries as a severance package per year of employment. Some people received 2 years of pay through this. This created a local vacation boom. Holy moly, talk about a huge F-up on that boss's part. And honestly, I bet everyone who was at the company was feeling all warm and fuzzy inside that whole month, just knowing what's about to come. Like, imagine getting 2 years of severance pay all because a boss royally messed up. Again, it pays to learn and know your employment laws. And since bosses messing up big time is so freaking satisfying, guys, listen to this next post where a Karen owner gets exactly what she deserves. So I worked for a company for 14 years, and I loved working there for 12 of those years. There were 2 main parts to the job. The first part was the sales side of things. This was away from the office in the customer's location. This involved quite a bit of driving to work face-to-face with customers to deliver a high-quality product. Now, we weren't the cheapest, but we were the superior product. I was also the best employee when it came to delivering the product. I consistently got rave reviews from customers for my personal style when it came to delivering the product and executing the customer's vision. I got a huge amount of repeat business, and I got a lot of new business through word of mouth with customers recommending the company based on their experience with me. The second part was the office side, and this was my weaker side. I hated cold calling potential customers with numbers I found in the phone book. When it came to answering the phone and speaking to potential customers, I was fine, but I wasn't great at making the calls. This was my only real not great part of my job. So in the office, I wasn't asked to make any calls. Instead, I prepared product, designed new product, trained staff members, that kind of stuff. I was also the problem solver, helping out whenever and wherever, and filling in for sick employees whenever I could. The company was doing so well, the owner had slowly expanded over 12 years since I started working for the company. I had joined 3 months after he started, so I'd been a part of this expansion. I worked out of my nearest office, but often traveled to other areas to train their staff. After 12 years, I was on a decent salary. Now, it wasn't massive, but I was happy. Then, the owner decides to sell off part of the company. He was selling the area where my local office was. He told me he would love for me to remain as his employee, but I would need to work from a different office. Now, this would require me to move, or quadruple my daily commute. The other option was to remain working from my current office, but with the new boss. I chose the second option. Before the new owner bought the company, she worked alongside the staff for a couple of weeks to see how we operated. This was before any of us knew she was about to buy the company. As far as we knew, she was just another employee, and she was shadowing us to learn. She came with me on assignments in the field, and she saw my abilities. When the sale was announced and we were informed that she was the new owner, everyone was very surprised. She then made some sweeping staff changes. The manager left to start her own business since the owner was also going to be the manager. A lot of staff was let go. The secretary, myself, and a couple of new hires were kept on. The new hires were on the lowest wages, not salaries. Anyone who had got to a decent level was let go. Now, while technically it was a new company, for the customers it was the same old business. The company still had the same trading name. The only difference was there was a new owner, and the registered business name was now different. As far as the customers were concerned, nothing had changed. My job for the first few months after the sale was to train up the remaining staff to replace the more experienced staff members who had been let go. I recommended a couple of new hires who I had experience working with in the past. I was open and honest with the owner. I let her know that one of them was a close friend and one of them was my girlfriend. Both were more than qualified for the work and both were happy to join. The owner gave them both interviews and then hired them since we needed the staff. Over the next 2 years, business starts to fall. And the reason was simple. The new owner decides to try to maximize profits by increasing prices while decreasing the quality of the product. For new customers, this wasn't noticeable. They just thought we were expensive and the product wasn't the best. But for old customers who were with us for 10+ years, they immediately noticed. They were being charged way more and they were receiving way worse quality. So the owner doubles down and increases prices again. This resulted in 95% of the old customers leaving us, and new customers almost never became repeat customers and complaints skyrocketed. While this was all going on, our staff turnover rate was ridiculous. People left after a few months when they realized that the minimum wage they were being paid wasn't worth it. Under the old owner, the average hourly wage for new employees was around 2.5 times the minimum wage. This made people care about their jobs and want to keep them. My girlfriend quit and my friend remained but was looking for something new. And that's when I got a phone call. The owner needs me to come to the office. This was unexpected as I just finished working on location with a customer and my next customer was in 2.5 hours and it was half an hour drive away. The office was about an hour and 10 minutes away from both locations. If I drove back to the office, I would have about 5 minutes in the office before leaving. I told the owner this and she said she didn't care. She needed me to return to the office. So I did. I arrived back to be handed a letter by the owner. She was informing me of a disciplinary meeting to take place in a couple of days' time and that I could bring a witness along if I desired. Now, this honestly shocked me as I was the best employee. I read through her list of complaints about my performance and I start working on my defense. At the meeting, I declined to have a witness. Instead, I decide to record the audio of the entire meeting on my phone without informing her. Where I live, this is legal. I didn't need consent. The boss's witness was her friend, who she met at yoga, and she hired for an office role, firing the secretary who was there for over a decade. Every point she raised, I could counter, and this ranged from the week, "You were unavailable to work for a week in August," to the pathetic, "You were late for work on the 12th of May," to the downright lies. This one I can't write as a quote. Basically, she accuses me of gross misconduct for breaking health and safety laws in the way I was delivering a product for a customer. Now, I hadn't broken any health and safety laws. I knew exactly what I was doing since I'd been doing this for 14 years at this point. She had also witnessed me do this on multiple occasions and she's never mentioned it before because it wasn't an issue. She even had me train staff in this very specific delivery method because it wasn't an issue. She then finished her list by telling me that she doesn't want to lose me, but she can't justify keeping such a bad employee at my current salary. She then gave me two choices. I could either sign a 0 hours contract and work for minimum wage, or she could fire me with 2 weeks notice. I then countered that she would have to give me 12 weeks notice, since my contract guaranteed me 1 week's notice for every year of employment, up to a maximum of 12. She then argued that I had only been her employee for 2 years, since before then, I worked for the previous owner. I informed her that with how the business takeover had run, it counts as continuous employment. I then quoted the exact law and code that backed me up. She then asked for a 30-minute break in the meeting to let me think about her offer. She went to call her lawyer. When she came back, she informed me that since she was firing me for gross misconduct, she didn't have to give me any notice at all. And if I wanted to remain an employee working for minimum wage, I could do that today. But if I didn't, she would have to fire me. She then said that because she was nice, she would give me 2 weeks notice. I then asked for a couple of hours to go home and think about it, and she allowed this. Now, I knew the reason she wanted me to remain for the last 2 weeks was because of one of our few remaining bigger customers who were set to have a product delivery from me in that time. They would only work with me. The owner had tried sending other staff in my place on many occasions, and each time there had been problems. It wasn't the staff's fault. It was a very difficult delivery for a very specific customer, which needed to be perfect. As a result, this customer would only deal with me. So I called the office and I spoke to the owner. I declined the offer of a 0 hours contract and I said I'd be leaving. She then said she was giving me my 2 weeks notice. I declined her offer of 2 weeks notice. I informed her that if I was being fired for gross misconduct, then surely I cannot be relied upon to safely deliver the product. Therefore, it would be best for everyone if I didn't return to work. She then panicked and she said she needs me for those 2 weeks. I just feigned ignorance and I let her know that I was thinking about what's best for the company. After all, you can't have unsafe staff delivering product to your customers. However, if she wanted to rethink the gross misconduct accusation, I would work my 12 weeks notice. That was her options, 0 weeks or 12 weeks. She chose 12 weeks. So for those 12 weeks, I worked the same way I had for 14 years. I didn't coast, I didn't slack, I didn't badmouth the company on my way out. I continued to train new staff. I continued to deliver the product in my own personal, exceptional way. I also got in touch with a lawyer who is a specialist in employment law. So for those 12 weeks, the owner barely spoke to me. She resented the fact that I knew my legal rights and I didn't believe her lies. She hated the fact that I could defend myself. She was petty. She accidentally dropped my mug in the kitchen, breaking it. But most petty of all, she paid for every member of the staff in the office to have a spa day, except for me. I was asked to work my day off to answer the phones, while everyone else was being pampered. Nobody knew I hadn't been invited until they arrived at the spa and I wasn't there. And here's the thing. I'm a big, fat, bearded guy. I have no interest in a spa day. If she offered me a spa day, I would have thanked her and declined the offer. But by pointedly excluding me, she was making herself look terrible. For the last 2 weeks, I was training up my friend to basically take over from me. At the end of the 12 weeks, my final day came around and the owner had nothing planned. Not so much as a card after 14 years. 2 for her. The day after my final day, 2 things happened. The first was my friend, who I'd been training up to this point to replace me. He quit. He was on a 0 hours contract, so required no notice. He was unhappy with her treatment of me, and he was unhappy that she expected him to do my job for minimum wage. The second was the owner received a letter informing her that I was bringing legal proceedings against her for unfair dismissal. I had arranged this with my lawyer to be delivered the day after my final day. According to the office assistant, she went pale and she started crying before leaving the office to call her lawyer. She refuted my claims of unfair dismissal. She said it was gross misconduct. She tried coming up with some more lies and reasons for firing me. But the truth was, the company was making less money because of her business practices, and I was the highest and only salary-paid employee. I had evidence that I was a great employee. I had evidence that she asked me to move to a 0 hours contract. She initially tried to deny this, since the gross misconduct fabrication makes no sense if she wanted me to stay. But once my lawyer provided hers with a transcript of the entire meeting along with a copy of the recording, she knew she was effed. Still, she let the case drag on for over a year. I think she hoped that the legal fees would lead me to dropping the case. Little did she know, my lawyer was working on a no-win, no-fee basis, while hers wasn't. She ends up settling out of court. And here's the aftermath. The office assistant, who had become a friend of mine, quit a couple of months after I left. She hated how I was treated, and she didn't feel safe working for such an untrustworthy boss. Several former customers contacted me personally to ask why I was no longer with the company. Apparently, the owner was telling them that I quit out of nowhere, leaving them high and dry. I informed them that I was fired for cost-cutting reasons. They moved their business elsewhere, and several offered me jobs. In the end, I found a new job in a different industry where my skills transferred over, currently earning more than I was and working less hours for better owners. As for the business is floundering. The new owner was desperate for cash. She canceled orders, but she refused to refund customers' money, citing an act of God clause in the contracts. The business's Facebook and Google reviews have tanked, and most of the staff left. The business is barely afloat and won't survive much longer. Oh boy, honestly, I can't say she didn't deserve that. Like, I could tell the way things were going when she took over and started firing all the experienced employees for new hires to cut costs. And you know what? As much as I love how that crappy owner got what she deserved in the end, it always pains me to hear when new owners take over a super successful business and they just run it into the ground like that. Like, some people really think they know better. Like, just because you have money to buy the business doesn't mean you can run it. I'm just glad OP left for greener pastures, because it's honestly insulting that that sleazy Karen owner thought she could replace him at minimum wage. Don't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, they say. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where a greedy Karen mom robs her daughter, and it's such a wild story. Go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.